She struck the match with her left hand, the one still wearing his ring, and watched the saloon's porch catch fire like a funeral pyre built for liars. The wind didn't howl that night. It held its breath, like the town, like the coyotes on the ridge, like the drunkard passed out in the alley who didn't stir even when the first tongue of flame licked the saloon's awning. Cora Vance stood barefoot in the dust, her toes curling against the grit, her wedding dress, once ivory lace, now gray with soot and streaked with something darker, clinging to her like a shroud. She didn't blink as the fire climbed the support beams, didn't flinch when glass shattered inward with a sound like a woman screaming underwater. She just stood there, arms loose at her sides, the spent matchstick still smoldering between her fingers until the flame kissed her skin and she dropped it without a sound. Behind her, the rusty spur groaned as its roof buckled, timbers snapping like old bones under a boot heel. Smoke poured from the shattered windows, thick and black, curling into the bruised twilight sky like the ghosts of every soul this place had swallowed whole. Men had laughed here, gambled, killed, loved, maybe in the way desperate men love, quick, cruel, and forgettable. Women had served drinks with lowered eyes, their smiles paid for in coin and silence. Children had been told to stay out back, and some never came back at all. Cora knew. She'd scrubbed the floors. She'd washed the glasses. She'd held her daughter's hand right here, on this porch, the night the sheriff said, "Come upstairs, little one. I've got candy and a view of the stars you won't believe." That was 3 months and 17 days ago. The sheriff's body was inside now, somewhere beneath the collapsing staircase, his throat opened by a blade, not by flame. Justice, they'd call it later, if anyone dared speak her name again. But Cora didn't think of justice as she watched the fire eat the saloon sign, the one that creaked in the wind with its spur-shaped iron swinging like a hanged man's foot. She thought of Lila's laugh, high and bright, like wind chimes made of glass. She thought of the tiny shoes she'd buried beneath the floorboards near the hearth, wrapped in the only clean dress the child owned. She thought of the letter, folded small and tucked inside her corset, written in a shaking hand that wasn't hers, a confession signed with a bloody thumbprint. And she thought of him, Silas, the man who rode in with death on his coat, and stayed because something in her eyes reminded him of his own buried sins. He tried to stop her, not because he feared the law. Men like Silas didn't fear sheriffs or posses or even God's judgment, but because he saw the hollow in her chest where her heart used to beat. "You don't have to do this," he'd whispered, gripping her wrist as she poured kerosene along the porch rail. She didn't pull away, just turned her head slowly, eyes dry, voice softer than falling ash. "Yes," she said, "Edo." And then she'd kissed him, not with love, not with lust, but with goodbye, and stepped back into the shadows where the matchbox waited. Now, as the heat blistered her cheeks and the roar of the blaze drowned out the distant howl of coyotes, Cora didn't pray, didn't cry, didn't beg forgiveness from heaven or hell. She just watched. And when the first beam crashed through the roof in a shower of sparks, she whispered to the wind, to the sky, to whatever God might be listening or whatever devil might be smiling, "Burn it all, if you ever loved me." Somewhere beyond the ridge, a horse whinnied, sharp, startled, as if answering. The fire didn't care. It never does. It only knows hunger. And tonight it feasted. The wind picked up then, swirling embers in the sky like fireflies fleeing the grave. And far to the east, where the railroad would someday scream through the plains, a single crow took flight, black wings cutting. The smoke-choked air Silas Rourke rode into town with his back to the sunrise. Not because he feared the light, but because the ghost behind him rode faster than any horse ever could. 3 days before the fire, Silas Rourke crested the ridge with his duster flapping like a surrender flag and his colt wrapped in oilcloth, its weight a familiar ache against his thigh. He hadn't planned to stop. Not here. Not anywhere. Towns were tombs with saloons, and saloons were confessionals where men paid in whiskey to forget what they'd done. He'd buried his last partner in a nameless canyon 2 weeks prior, Elias, who'd laughed like thunder and died coughing blood into the sand, A bullet meant for Silas lodged in his ribs. Right on. Elias had choked out, gripping Silas's sleeve with fingers already turning cold. Don't let him make you soft. Silas hadn't answered. Just closed Elias's eyes, marked the grave with a broken spur, and rode west with no destination but distance. He swore off vengeance, swore off whiskey, swore off women who looked at him like he was a savior instead of a storm. But Cora Vance, she didn't look at him like anything at all. When he first saw her, she was hauling water from the well behind the livery, arms trembling under the weight of the bucket, her dress patched at the elbow, her hair tied back with a scrap of faded ribbon. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just met his eyes for half a second, long enough for him to see the hollows beneath them, the kind carved by grief that doesn't sleep, and turn away. He told himself to keep riding, told himself twice. The third time, he tied his horse to the post outside the general store and bought a canteen, a knife, and a bar of lye soap he didn't need. That night, he found her kneeling in the churchyard behind the abandoned chapel, moonlight silvering the dust on her shoulders, her fingers raw and bleeding as she dug into the hard-packed earth with nothing but a rusted spoon. He didn't ask what she was doing. I didn't need to. The smallness of the hole told him. The quiet sob she choked back told him more. He crouched beside her, not touching, just close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone. "They're watching from the windows," she whispered, voice cracked like dry riverbed clay. He followed her gaze. 3 faces peered from the upstairs rooms of the rusty spur. Men in suspenders, cigars glowing in the dark. Watching, smiling. Silas didn't believe in ghosts. Not the kind that moaned in graveyards or rattled chains in attics. But he believed in guilt, the kind that rides with you, sleeps beside you, whispers in your ear when the fire dies. And when Cora finally unearthed what she was looking for, tiny bones still wrapped in yellowed lace, a child's ribbon tangled in the ribs like a vine, Silas felt something inside him break. Not loudly, not with a shout or a curse, just a quiet snap like a bowstring stretched too far. He helped her rebury the remains without speaking, carried her home when her legs gave out, sat on her porch until sunrise, listening to her breathe, uneven and shallow, like a horse nearing the end of a hard run. The next morning, he went to the saloon. Not to drink, not to gamble, to look. He sat at the bar, ordered coffee, black, no sugar, and watched the men come and go, their laughter too loud, their eyes too quick to dart toward the stairs. He saw Sheriff Grady hold court near the fireplace, gold tooth glinting as he told some story about teaching an Indian girl respect. He saw the barkeep slide a folded bill into his apron after a man stumbled out the back door, adjusting his belt. And he saw Cora, behind the bar, pouring whiskey with steady hands, her smile stitched on like a mask sewn too tight. That night, Silas broke into the saloon, not to steal, to search. Beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, the same hearth where Lila used to sit coloring with charcoal on scrap paper, he found a ledger. Names, dates, payments, and at the bottom of the last page, written in ink that had bled with moisture or maybe tears, Lila, age 4, paid in silence. He stared at it until his vision blurred. Then he walked to the general store, bought a bottle of rye and a box of matches. He didn't drink the whiskey, just held it, and the matches, all night, all next day. He watched Cora from across the street as she swept the boardwalk, her movements slow, deliberate, like a woman walking through deep water. He saw the way men avoided her gaze, the way mothers pulled their children inside when she passed. He saw the sheriff tip his hat to her, a smirk beneath the brim, and heard her reply, soft but clear, "You'll choke on that smile one day, Grady." That night, Silas found her on the porch again, staring at the saloon like it owed her blood. He sat beside her, didn't speak, just handed her the bottle. She took it, didn't drink, just held it against her chest like a talisman. "It won't bring her back," he said finally, voice rough from disuse. Cora didn't look at him. "I know. Then why?" She turned then, eyes dry, lips cracked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because if I don't burn it, I'll burn myself." Silas didn't argue, didn't try to stop her, just nodded. And when she stood, He stood with her. Not to help, not to save, just to bear witness. Some fires, he thought, watching her walk toward the saloon with the bottle in one hand and the matches in the other, are lit by hands that have nothing left to lose. Far beyond the town, where the desert swallowed the horizon, a single gunshot echoed, too distant to mean anything. Or maybe, Silas thought, it meant everything. The saloon didn't burn because it was evil. It burned because no one dared say her daughter's name out loud, not even when the floorboards still smelled like her blood. Before the fire, before the silence, before the sheriff's body cooled beneath the collapsed staircase, the rusty spur had music. Not the kind that lifted souls, the kind that drowned them. Fiddles screeched on Friday nights, tinny and off-key, while miners stomped boots caked with or dust, and cowboys threw dice stained with tobacco spit. Laughter rang too loud, too forced, bouncing off walls that had heard too many secrets. Cora moved through it all like a shadow with a tray, pouring rye, wiping spills, nodding at jokes she didn't hear. Her smile never reached her eyes. Not since Lila. The child had been a flicker of light in a place built for darkness. Small hands clutching a tin soldier, bare feet pattering across the warped floorboards, humming made-up songs to the stray cat that slept behind the bar. The regulars pretended not to notice her, or pretended too hard. Sheriff Grady noticed. Always did. He'd ruffle her hair when he came in, drop a peppermint on the bar for the little lady, wink at Cora like they shared some private joke. She never laughed, never thanked him, just tucked the candy into her apron pocket and later, when Lila wasn't looking, tossed it into the outhouse pit. She knew men like Grady, knew the way their kindness came with hooks, knew the way their eyes lingered too long on small things they thought no one would miss. The night it happened, the saloon was half empty, just a few drunks nursing cheap whiskey and a card game winding down in the corner. Lila had been coloring near the hearth, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration, her soldier propped beside her like a guard. Grady came in late, coat damp from the rain, smelling of wet wool and cigar smoke. He didn't sit, didn't order, just leaned over the bar, voice low, smile wide. "Lila, sweetheart, come upstairs with me. I've got something to show you." A music box that plays Rockabye Baby. Real silver. Cora's blood turned to ice. "She's tired," she said, voice steady, fingers tightening around the rag in her hand. "Tomorrow." Grady didn't blink, didn't raise his voice, just reached into his coat and pulled out a silver locket, tiny, delicate, the kind meant for a girl's neck. "Look what I got her," he cooed, dangling it in front of Lila's wide eyes. The child stood, took a step. Cora lunged, but Grady moved faster, catching Lila's wrist with one hand and flashing Cora a look that froze her in place. "Don't make a scene, Cora," he murmured, voice velvet over iron. "You know how folks talk." And then he led her up the stairs. Cora stood behind the bar, rag crumpled in her fist, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The men at the tables didn't look up. The bartender polished a glass. The fiddle player tuned his strings. No one moved. No one spoke. Upstairs, a door clicked shut. Then silence. Heavy, thick, suffocating. Cora waited. 1 hour. 2. When she finally climbed the stairs, the hallway was empty. Grady's door was locked. She knocked. No answer. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Not even breathing. She went back downstairs. Served another round. Smiled at a joke about mules. Laughed like her lungs weren't filling with sand. At dawn, Grady came down alone, coat buttoned wrong, hair uncombed, humming. He dropped a silver dollar on the bar. "She's sleeping," he told Cora, eyes flat, voice casual. "Let her rest." Cora didn't go up. Not then. Not ever. She scrubbed the bar until her knuckles bled, mopped the floor until the boards shone, washed glasses until her fingers wrinkled. 3 days later, a ranch hand found Lila's body in the dry creek bed half a mile west of town. Throat slit, locket gone, tin soldier clutched in her stiff fingers. They called it an Apache raid. Said she must have wandered off. Said Cora should be grateful they buried her at all. Cora didn't cry at the funeral, didn't speak, just stood at the edge of the grave, hands clasped, eyes dry, while the preacher mumbled about angels and the sheriff tipped his hat like a man paying respects at a stranger's wake. That night, Cora went back to the saloon. It opened early, swept, polished, set out fresh glasses. And when Grady walked in at noon, she served him his usual rye, no ice, with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. For weeks, she scrubbed. Every night. After closing, she knelt by the hearth with a brush and lye, scrubbing at the floorboards until her fingers blistered, until the wood turned pale, until the smell of blood faded beneath the stench of soap and sweat. No one asked why. No one cared. The ledger came later, hidden beneath a loose plank near the hearth, a record of every girl, every payment, every silence bought and sold. Names, dates, prices, and at the bottom, in Grady's looping script, Lila, age 4, paid in silence. Cora didn't scream when she found it, didn't tear it apart, just folded it small, tucked it into her corset, and went back to work. She poured drinks, smiled at jokes, nodded when men patted her shoulder. And every night, after the last drunk stumbled out, she'd kneel by the hearth again, scrubbing, not to clean, but to remember. The night Silas found her digging in the churchyard, she didn't tell him about the ledger. Didn't need to. He saw it in her eyes. The arithmetic of grief, the sum of every silence, every turn back, every coin clinking in a Grady's palm while a child screamed upstairs. He didn't ask what she planned, just bought the matches. And the whiskey, not to drink, to pool. The night before the fire, Cora sat on her porch, the bottle in her lap, the matches in her palm. Silas sat beside her, silent. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant. "You don't have to do this," he said again, voice rough. Cora didn't look at him, just ran her thumb over the matchbox, feeling the grit of the striking strip. "Yes," she whispered. "Edo. Not for justice, not for revenge, but because some names shouldn't be buried in silence. Some fires shouldn't be left unlit. Some saloons, no matter how loud the music, how bright the lights, deserve to burn." In the distance, a train whistle cut through the night. Long, mournful, like a warning no one would heed. The morning after the fire, the town didn't mourn the saloon. They mourned their own silence, the kind that sticks to your tongue like ash and never washes clean. Smoke still curled from the blackened ribs of the rusty spur when the first townsfolk crept from their homes, boots crunching on cinders, eyes wide and hollow as empty wells. No one spoke, not at first. They just stood in the street, shoulders hunched against the morning chill, staring at the ruin like it might rise up and accuse them. The smell hung thick, charred wood, melted glass, something meaty and sweet underneath that made children gag and old men turn away. Sheriff Grady's body was found near the collapsed staircase, half buried under a beam, his gold tooth glinting through the soot, his throat slit clean, not by fire, but by steel. No one claimed to see who did it. No one dared. Cora walked down Main Street at high noon, barefoot, her scorched dress trailing dust, her hair loose and wild. She didn't look at the gawkers, didn't flinch when a woman spat in the dirt near her feet. She just walked, slow, steady like a woman heading to church on Sunday. Men pulled hats lower. Boys stopped their games. Shopkeepers let their doors swing shut. Silas watched from the livery loft, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the rooftops, the alley mouths, the windows where curtains twitched. He knew they'd come for her. Not today, maybe, but soon. Men like Grady don't die without someone demanding blood, even if that blood belongs to a woman who scrubbed their floors and served their whiskey while they looked the other way. He packed his saddlebags that morning, hardtack, canteen, spare ammunition. His horse, a rangy bay named Mercy, stamped and snorted, sensing the tension in the air like a coming storm. He'd leave tonight, take Cora with him, or die trying. But when he found her at the edge of town, standing by the dry well where Lila used to drop pebbles and count the seconds until the splash, she didn't look at him, just stared at the horizon, where the railroad tracks cut through the prairie like a scar. "You don't have to die today," he said, voice low. She smiled then, small, sad, the first real smile he'd ever seen on her lips. I died the night they took her, she said. This, she gestured toward the smoldering ruin behind them. This is just what's left. That night, the church bell rang. Not for service, not for prayer, for warning. One slow, heavy toll, then silence. Then another. Folks knew that sound, knew it meant trouble riding in from the dark. Silas saddled Mercy, checked his colt, stuffed Cora's tin soldier, rusted but whole, into his coat pocket. He found her on her porch, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, eyes dry, face calm. They're coming, he said. She nodded. Let them. Cora, you go. She cut him off, voice soft but firm. Ride east. Find someone who'll listen. Tell them we were here. Tell them her name. He didn't argue, didn't beg, just gripped her hand, cold, rough, trembling slightly, and pressed the soldier into her palm. Keep this, he said, for luck. She closed her fingers around it. Didn't thank him, didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked inside, shutting the door softly behind her. Silas mounted up, rode to the ridge, watched. Below, torches flickered to life in the town square, 20, maybe 30, bobbing like fireflies in a jar. Voices rose, angry, ragged, righteous. They shouted for Cora, demanded justice, called her witch, murderer, devil in a dress. No one mentioned Lila. No one mentioned the ledger. No one mentioned the silence that had stretched for months, years maybe, thick and suffocating, until it choked the truth right out of them. Silas turned Mercy east. He didn't look back. Not when the first gunshot cracked the night. Not when the mob surged toward Cora's cabin. Not when the second shot rang out. Closer, sharper, final. He rode. Fast. Hard. The wind tore at his coat. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and silent. Behind him, the prairie held its breath. Again, like it always had. Like it always would. Some towns, he thought, don't burn. They just rot from the inside out, until there's nothing left but dust and ghosts and the weight of names no one dared speak. Far behind him, a single crow cawed, sharp, mocking, as if laughing at the idea of justice in a place like this. They came with torches and righteous fury, but Cora was already gone, standing on the bluff with the wind in her hair and Lila's name on her lips, ready to let the sky take what the earth refused to hold. The mob didn't shout when they reached her cabin, didn't kick in the door, didn't drag her into the street like they'd planned. They just stood there, torches guttering in the dawn wind, faces painted orange in shadow, staring at the empty porch, the unlatched door swinging softly on rusted hinges. Inside, the bed was made, the hearth cold. A single tin soldier sat on the windowsill, catching the first light like a beacon. Silas didn't know they'd found it empty. He was already 10 miles east, Mercy's hooves pounding the hardpan, his coat flapping like a tattered flag, the echo of gunfire still ringing in his ears. He didn't stop, didn't look back. Not when the sun rose. Not when the canteen ran dry. Not when the coyotes started howling. Not in hunger, but in warning. Cora hadn't gone to the cabin. She'd gone to Miller's Bluff, the high ridge overlooking the town, where lovers used to sneak at midnight and outlaws used to scan the horizon for posses. She stood at the edge now, barefoot, the wind whipping her scorched dress against her legs, her hair streaming behind her like smoke. Below, the town looked small, insignificant. The saloon skeletons still smoldered, black against the dawn. The church steeple poked the sky like a crooked finger. The dry creek bed where they'd found Lila glinted silver in the rising light. She didn't cry, didn't pray, didn't clutch her chest like a woman expecting her heart to burst. She just stood and watched and waited. When Silas found her, breath ragged, horse lathered, eyes wild, she didn't turn. Just spoke without looking, voice calm as still water. You came back. He reined in beside her, boots hitting the dirt with a thud. I told you to ride. I did, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. Then I turned around. She smiled, small, sad, the same smile she'd given him the night before the fire. Fool. Maybe. He stepped closer, didn't touch her, just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the town waking up beneath them. They're coming, he said. I know. You don't have to die today. She turned then. Eyes dry, lips cracked, voice softer than falling ash. I died the night they took her. He didn't argue, didn't beg, just reached into his coat and pulled out a canteen, half full, warm from his saddlebag. Held it out. She took it, didn't drink, just held it against her chest, like she had the whiskey bottle 3 nights ago. Tell me something, she said. Anything, he thought. Then, I buried Elias under a juniper tree, marked it with his spur. He'd have hated that, said junipers were ugly, spiteful things. But it was the only tree for 20 miles. She nodded. Good. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, like the quiet before storm breaks. Below, the first riders crested the ridge, torches gone now, rifles glinting in the sun. 20 men, maybe more, shouting, cursing, calling her name. Cora didn't flinch, just reached into her dress and pulled out the tin soldier, rusted, dented, one arm bent at a crooked angle. Pressed it into Silas's palm, closed his fingers around it. Ride, she whispered. Tell them we were here. Tell them her name. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at her, throat tight, eyes burning. She stepped back, toward the edge. Wind tugged at her dress, her hair, her soul. Go, she said. And then she turned, walked to the very edge of the bluff. Didn't look down, didn't look back, just spread her arms, not like a bird, not like a martyr, like a woman finally letting go, and stepped off. Silas didn't scream, didn't lunge, didn't fire his rifle at the men now scrambling up the slope below. He just stood there, frozen, watching, as her dress caught the wind, as her body arced, slow, graceful, silent, down toward the rocks. As the wind carried her last word, not a scream, not a prayer, just a name. Lila. He didn't watch her hit the ground. Couldn't. Just turned, mounted Mercy, and rode. East. Fussed. Hard. The sun climbed. The wind howled. Behind him, the mob reached the bluff, shouting, cursing, firing shots in the air like fools celebrating a victory they didn't understand. Silas didn't stop, didn't look back. Not when the coyotes fell silent. Not when the railroad tracks appeared on the horizon, gleaming like a promise. Not when the first raindrop hit his cheek, warm, heavy, tasting of salt and smoke. He rode, and in his pocket, the tin soldier rattled softly against his thigh, a tiny, rusted heartbeat. A reminder, a promise, a name. Somewhere far behind him, the prairie sighed, long and low, like a mother finally cradling her lost child. The wind didn't whisper. It never does. But if you listen, really listen, you can hear it carry voices. Names. Stories. Fires that burned too bright to be forgotten. Cora's. Lila's. Elias's. Even Grady's. All of them. All at once. Rising like smoke into the endless sky. And if you stand on Miller's Bluff at dawn, when the wind is just right, you might hear it too. Not a whisper. A reckoning.